was asked to give a title for this, and I thought about what usefully I could say based on my experience, and the title I gave was, do we need different leaders for different types and sizes of organisations? And then they said, well, could you give a subtitle as well? So I thought, well, exploring the dynamics of leadership across small and large third sector organisations. But you know, if I was writing the headline for what I'm going to say to you, the title would have been One Skill, Two Personal Qualities, and a Pinch of Good Fortune. So that's really what I'm going to talk to you about. One essential skill, two personal qualities, and a pinch of good fortune. Because I think, in essence, it's very, very hard to distill down. I mean, I'm not an academic researcher in this field. It's very hard to distill things down to what makes good leadership and what makes organisations work. But here's my four examples, in a way, that lead me to the conclusion that one essential skill and two personal qualities and a bit of luck really matter. So I started life as an educationalist, and I went from part-time teacher to having just got my PhD to principal of Milton Keynes College within a decade, 10 years. 1976 to 1986, 77, 87. And I came here to Milton Keynes first as vice principal and quickly got promoted to be principal of Milton Keynes College. And I then spent 10 years from 86 to 96 leading that FE college. Now, if anybody knows about FE at that time, it was not really, still isn't to some extent, but really the kind of sector of education that most people focused on, because schools and universities much more understood, and certainly FE in Buckinghamshire was kind of very much the poor relation. But that said, during that period, the then Tory majority government, we did have a Tory majority government during that time, between 89 92 decided that they would take colleges out of local authority control and in a sense, in their words, kind of liberate FE colleges to become dynamic and entrepreneurial public sector organisations. So I was a principal during that time, and it gave me the opportunity to spend 10 years as a principal, fundamentally doing what somebody said of me was about public sector entrepreneurship. When I took over the college, we had just over 2,000 students. When I left, we had 20,000 students. I mean, we are in Milton Keynes, and it was growing. We had a budget of 2 million initially, and when I left, it was over 20 million. So I was involved in developing and growing a public sector organisation, and essentially in developing a culture and in developing and designing, I suppose, and doing what we today call organisational development. Now, the truth is, I had no management training for this. I'd kind of developed my attitudes to leadership, I suppose, based on my dad, who was a butcher, who ran his own business, if I think about the kind of models of leadership in my head. So, and of course, I'm one of two children, and I was the eldest, and I was a brownie and a Girl Guide leader. So I think my ideas of leadership were very under-researched and under-theorised. And so my first example is that you can actually become a leader, even quite young, not make too much of a mess of it, although others might judge differently, but not make too much of a mess of it. And then when you reflect on the experience, which I did, I came to the conclusion that, in a sense, what I was doing there was just taking my own inner model of leadership, what the Tavistock Institute, I subsequently learned, would call the organisation of the mind. And I actually was living that out in the way I did things, the way I held meetings, the way I organised my management structures, the behaviours of the organisation, the values I internally held, which then I was externalising. Anyway, that's terribly broad brush, but I wanted to just say that, you know, I was not an experienced leader. I didn't make a bad fist of it. Oh, we were in Ofsted terms as well. When I left, we were like the equivalent of a grade 2 now, so we weren't outstanding. But I mean, when I went there, we were even worse than special measures, actually, Milton Keynes College was. So I had gone on a journey of making a college, a public sector organisation, a more values-driven, well-run, and essentially delivering to its users, basically its students, in a more effective way. And that was a great learning experience, which is why I then went to do a second principal's job. And although I'd taken 10 years in Milton Keynes, actually to do that organisational transformation, that change management programme, can you tell the change of the tone of my language, because I learnt these words. I mean, I didn't know that's what I was doing, but those were the management words, apparently, for what I was doing. So from 96 to 2000, I went and did a second principal's job in Cambridge Regional College. And in a sense, all that learning I'd had on the job, which I'd internalised and thought about, I kind of was able to put into practice in a different context. And it was great to have that opportunity, and I think to move that college along as well. So that's one set of experiences. My second set of experiences then came when I had this rather grand title of Chief Executive of the University for Industry. Well, actually, it was Learn Direct, folks, if you probably may have heard of that, an e-learning initiative. But we go back to the Blair government days, 97, onwards, lots of initiatives and lots of kind of ideas. And this was a public-private sector, big government initiative, a large-scale attempt to get Britain plugged in. It was kind of meant to be, actually, since I'm in the OU, the sort of OU for the FE sector, hence the University for Industry, which actually somebody called James Pennell thought up, and it was a Gordon Brown idea and went into the 97 manifesto. And then when Tony Blair got in, he paid all his attention to schools and didn't really worry about this little initiative from Gordon Brown. Anyway, it doesn't matter. From the point of view of leadership and working in the public sector, what this was about was I was responsible for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, was actually realising the issues of distributed leadership, because I was responsible for the 6,000 UK online centres, the 2,000 Learn Direct centres, but actually I didn't have any control over them, and how you handled public accountability, 350 million per annum of public money, to which I was responsible to the Public Accounts Committee, delegated to, you know, a library in Scarborough to get people online, and what kind of issues of leadership and control and quality assurance are thrown up in relation to that. So I learned a lot about putting in at scale, large reach, a major government initiative. At the same time, and my third kind of experience, it's been alluded to, is as I left Milton Keynes College in 96, 97, and this Blair government came in, I don't know if any of you remember it, but they clearly had no idea what they were going to do with higher education even then. And so in an attempt to address this issue of higher education funding, for a very short period, they introduced upfront tuition fees of £1,000. Now, if you've been an FE college student in Milton Keynes College or Cambridge, as I'd gone to, and you'd probably been on an access course, actually, provided by the OU or others, or you were returning to learn after not actually having had very good experiences of the educational system, and you want to get a degree because you know that is something that will help you personally and will be good for you to develop a career or profession. The last thing you wanted was to be hit with, oh, well, it's all right, you can take on a debt now, you can pay £1,000 up front because you're going to earn a lot when you eventually get a job, when you've got a degree. So as I moved from Milton Keynes College to Cambridge Regional College, Helena Kennedy had produced a report called Learning Works, seminal report, about the power and talent of people in adult and further education. I mean, it was right up the OU street and very much what you in the voluntary and charitable sector would recognise. Tons of people out there that just don't get the opportunity to get a degree. Labour government came in, put her in the House of Lords, but just forgot about her report. So as I moved from Milton Keynes College to Cambridge Regional College, and I'd met Helena as part of her committee of inquiry into this, I thought we can't have this. We can't have these students from FE who are not going to be able to, or are going to be thwarted when they've got their foot on the second rung of the ladder, as it were. And so I wrote to her and I said, well, I want to start this charity which gives the £1,000 tuition fees to students from the kind of disadvantaged backgrounds that you've spoken about in Learning Works. And to her credit, she said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. And I said, I don't want any money from you. I don't know anything much about starting a charity, but I'll find out. I will find the money from the sector. The FE sector can supply us to that, can come into it. Anyway, cut a very, very long story short. My third experience I want to share with you is one of actually founding a small charity, which celebrates its 20th anniversary this year, because it was launched in November 1998. As we hit November 2018, 20 years on, we've helped nearly 1,700 students to go from further education, adult and further education, into universities, get their degrees, and in fact that a lot of them are now doing the most amazing things out. But that was a starting from scratch experience as a founder. Obviously never ran the organisation. In fact, we never had staff running it. But I've got some experience of what it takes to keep justice, even though it was a national scale charity, to keep a small charity on the road. And I guess many of you are volunteers or chief execs or senior people in small scale charities as well. And then finally, to this thing that's here, I wasn't especially looking for another major role in my 60s. But when the chair of the Scout Association came up, and given that I had actually been spending about 10 years or so, a decade really, my 50s, 60s, developing a real understanding of governance, so not the leadership, the executive leadership that I've just illustrated in terms of my own career, but much more focus on governance. And given that I had had the most wonderful experience as a brownie and guide, it had fundamentally changed my life, really, because it was sort of informal learning as opposed to formal learning at school, which I wasn't terribly good at, I didn't think. I think it turned out I was probably all right, but I didn't have a lot of self-confidence and think I was all right. So brownies and guides were important. I thought, the Scouts, they do actually, of course, take girls now. For 25 years we've had girls in Scouting, but I just thought, well, that would be great. That would be a major UK charity with doing some fantastic work with young people in an area that I care about. So I took that on, and I'm just completing my third year there, and that will be my first term, and I'll do a second term. And we have a very interesting, I think, in relation to a centre for voluntary sector leadership that focuses on collaboration and cooperation as a leadership style. We have a very interesting setup there. Because I am the chair of trustees. We do have a chief executive who runs the organisation, so the recognisable and very necessary accountable persons, chair and chief exec. But because we're a voluntary-led organisation, just incidentally, there are over 500,000 young people in the UK who are involved in Scouting. It's the largest mixed youth organisation in the country, and over 150,000 adult volunteers who support those young people. So it's a very big movement, 650,000 people. Because of the voluntary nature of the work and the distributed nature of the work, it's a federated charity, so there are 8,000 separate charities. I mean, I run the UK, I'm responsible for the UK board, but there are 8,000 charities. having somebody from the voluntary movement, as it were, as a leader is important. So we have a UK Chief Commissioner, who is a scout, came up through the scouting ranks, as it were, and we have a UK Youth Commissioner, who is the sort of chief youth person, as it were, under 25. And we are called the Key Four. And we work together, the four of us, running that organisation, which I think is a very interesting, if not sometimes challenging, but also very beneficial model of distributive leadership, which you might like to ask me a little bit more about. So those are the things that I've done. To get to the punchlines, and in terms of answering my own question that I set, do you need different types of leadership for different sizes and types of organisation, and what are the dynamics that matter between that? My conclusion is this, and as I say, you might want to challenge it and probe it, but my conclusion is that actually it's not so much the type of organisation, whether it's public, private or voluntary, or the size of the organisation, or even the sector in which the organisation operates, that's the key determinant to what makes effective and good leadership. What does matter is the nature and style of the leadership of that organisation, the personality and the character of the leaders, combined with the prevailing culture in the organisation and in wider society, and indeed the ethics, stroke values of the organisation in which you're working. Those are the kind of key determinants. And that's why, for me, if I was put on the spot and I was asked, well, what actually really matters, and where are some examples of today where we can see this played out, I would say absolutely the key, I call it a skill, but it's an experience, it's a skill that you have. The key thing is judgment. At the end of the day, it's all about the calls you make. I mean, I am reluctant to use as an example somebody I've not met and so I've only seen through the media. So I do so hesitantly, but just to illustrate this point. So I've never met the chief exec of Oxfam, or indeed the chair of Oxfam. I understand from my chief exec at the Scouts, a guy called Matt Hyde, who is terrific chief exec in my view, but Mark Goldring is a very, very well-regarded CEO in the UK charity sector. And I have to say, when I woke up to Radio 4 on that first Saturday morning, and I heard him speaking, I thought the quality of I thought the call he had made to go on the Today programme, the quality and the nature of what he was saying, given the circumstances, was absolutely spot on. In fact, I contacted Matt and said, gosh, that guy's good. And Matt said, yeah, he's really well regarded. I'm afraid by the next Saturday, once he had gone, or they had gone, or the governance had gone, understandably in human terms, but to The Guardian, for something for which he then subsequently apologised, but gone and let his feelings be known, and made the kind of comments that were likely to be misinterpreted, no matter how heartfelt they were. It's an example of a good call turning into a bad call. Now he seems to be riding through it, I don't know. But that's what I mean. It's all about the calls you make, the judgments you make at the time, and how you make those judgments. So that's my key skill. In terms of the personal qualities, oh God, I hate this bit really, but the answer to the question, the two qualities you've got to have courage, and you've got to have humility. Now, whenever I say humility, I'll say something about courage just very briefly in a minute, but I'm always reminded of a joke, well, not a joke, but a comment my mother used to make. God, she said, grant me modesty, that art of drawing attention to whatever it is we're being humble about. Actually, it's Bob Monkhouse who said that. But there's a lot of that. There's a lot of that in leadership. Tony Blair comes to mind, actually. But anyway, I'm not trying to assassinate anybody here. I'm just trying to give you a few personal examples. But you know, it's very, very hard not to get sucked in to the power of the role, isn't it? It's just so hard if you are the number one in anything to not suck in that oxygen of being the person sort of in charge, being the leader. But actually, we all do it at our peril. So how on earth you handle your own ego and how you handle other people's ego, which is just another way of saying this is the personal qualities you've got to have, will be a matter for you individually, but it's a key ingredient to getting that right. And mostly we don't get it right, and I certainly didn't. I can give you some examples of that. I think I've got infinitely better at doing it as I've got older, so perhaps it's something that we do learn if we are open to learning. And as far as the courage is concerned, well, it kind of goes back also to not just knowing how to make the right calls, but then being prepared to stick with them. I effectively got the elbow from Learn Direct when I clashed with, actually not the government, but with the public-private sector board, private sector really, guy who'd been put in charge of it, former chief exec of BAE Systems. And he and I didn't really see eye to eye on the way the organisation would go. And when something like that happens to you, when you're not really quite expecting to lose your job just because you kind of disagree with somebody, but they have the power to get rid of you, it does put you into a situation where you actually have to not just act with your own personal integrity, but you do have to have courage to kind of deal with the failure as much as the courage to take the bold decisions. And I think, again, that's a very, very difficult ingredient for anybody in leadership to try and get right. But I'm absolutely convinced you kind of need to have it if you are to get good leadership. And then finally, the bit of luck. Well, actually, I don't know whether you can create your own luck. Sometimes things go your way, sometimes they don't. But I do think the reality is, if you make the right judgments about your own career, about your own organisation, based in the right set of values with the right approaches and personal qualities that I've talked about, then sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you don't get lucky. And you have to ride the lucky bits and go with that. And you have to, a bit like going over lumps of ice when you're skiing, you have to go over the rough bits and just stay on your skis when things go bad. But sooner or later, I think everybody gets a bit of luck. You just have to be open to recognising it. And if you put all of those things together, I think the conclusion that, as I say, I came to is there are no formulas, there are no easy ways of saying what works in a small organisation will inevitably translate into a large organisation and vice versa. But what I know in plotting that journey that I've just taken you through is that if I've stuck to the things that I've highlighted to you, if I've stuck with the decisions that I have made, and I've been open to making those decisions in a very collaborative manner, listening to other people's judgments, trying not to let my own need to control my own requirement to be accountable for the outcome get too much in the way of doing the right thing, then that's been positive. And if I've tried to find ways of ensuring that when it came to taking bold decisions, there were ways in which I could find that courage internally and also not get too big-headed about it, then that's been a good thing. Doing the right thing for the organisation has been what has resulted, and that in turn has been the right thing for me as an individual.